Now, I wanted to hold off on doing a thing on Derrida specifically because I wanted to sort of let the conservative part of the argument be fleshed out before moving on to more controversial versions of the so-called relativist argument. And Derrida is not a relativist, but he is used, oftentimes in these debates. He's a postmodernist, he's a relativist, he's this, and this. And when they describe his actual argument, that's nothing to do with what he actually said or wrote. So I'm going to give a very, very short survey of what he is up to and then move on to more advanced topics. So what is deconstruction? What is the big controversy about? Well, we begin very slowly and quickly through Ferdinand Saussure, who's a linguist, and Derrida was not the first. Roland Barthes technically is one of the first to popularize him, but Derrida's reading of Saussure is much more radical and extreme, and that's where we see the birth of deconstruction. So what's Saussure's ideas then? Well, it's actually fairly simple. Like wherever we encounter a word like cat, it does not have positive meaning. In other words, we don't know what a cat is by the meaning of its own term, as in cat is an animal or cat is four-legged. Rather, we know what cat is because it doesn't sound like another word. So cat is cat because bat is bat, or mat is mat, or pat is pat. So in other words, the meaning of that individual word is given by its phonetic difference with other words, even when the words that sound almost like it, like that, mat, pat, it does not sound like cat. So cat derives meaning from a system of differences that is internal to the language. Now, insofar as we go, this is not very controversial, although it could be wrong. But Derrida goes a couple steps further, and this is how we get deconstruction, because he says, okay, we supposedly have this system of differences, and that gives us meaning. And he concentrates on what's known as the arbitrariness of the sign. In other words, cat could have been something else. Cat could have been fat, cat could have been mat, and so on and so forth. And the answer is, well, it's not that, so we still have the meaning of the word. But Derrida says, no, that's just sort of imposed upon us by convention. But if we look carefully at the actual texts where words arise, especially in philosophy, we're going to find that they have basically unspoken of paradoxes and a prioras, as he puts it, or just places that they cannot explain what they're saying. And his major thrust is to say that there's a logocentric tradition, one that is, quote, reason-based or reason-centric, and it always goes back to the human voice. In other words, meaning is ultimately given by the voice. It's the voice that gives us meaning. But in texts by Plato, Rousseau, Husserl, and others, they can never prove this, right? Because the works themselves are written. So they're in this kind of weird place where they're supposedly the real truth is always parasitic on this human voice, but the texts we actually read are not the voice itself, right? They're just a written account of the voice, and therefore we don't have access to the truth, at least immediately. And Derrida's point is that whereas these writers seem to think that's a bad thing, he's going to turn it around and say, no, this is a good thing. Hence his infamous term, there is nothing outside the text, or in French, il n'y a pas de hors texte, which literally means there is no going outside the text. Right? There is no outside to the text. There is no outside to our sense perceptions or to our ways of organizing the world. We're always within language, and if that's true, you can't escape the effects of deconstruction by just saying, but we know what the truth is. Truth is 1 + 1 = 2 or whatever, because that's not what he's saying. He's saying something a little bit more radical. It's not that he's saying something like the liar's paradox. The liar's paradox would be, this sentence is false, right? That's not what he's saying. A deconstructionist reading would be, this sentence may be true or it may be false. This sentence or phrase may be true or false. This sentence or phrase may be true, false, vague, clear, precise, right? It's constantly attacking. Well, what does the word mean? How does the word have unambiguous meaning? If it has some ambiguity of meaning, what you can do is start basically tearing it apart, because that ambiguity will be opened up and deconstructed. However, he's not saying then the sense is false or the meaning of the text is false. Rather, it's been made way more complicated, and therefore you can't stop the effects of deconstruction just because you want to. The effects just keep going in this infinite play of meaning going back and forth between the word, the way the word sounds, and what the word means, the way the word is written, and the way the word is interpreted by a community. So a much more proper definition of deconstruction is the constant reminding of the reader of that the text has meanings that are never metaphysically there. Any ambiguities should be seen as virtues, not faults, and that there is no way to stop the effects of deconstruction. So this deconstruction here is not a theory or even a philosophy or a method, but an active way of approaching text. Texts are never without ambiguity. There will always be some metaphysical ambiguity within the text, and therefore there was always a certain amount of deconstruction within the actual text itself. The deconstructionist is just teasing out that deconstructive reading, but the reading is never finalized, right? There will always be something you could add on or keep going. So the way he characterizes it, it's basically an active game that you can never stop playing. And that is deconstruction in a nutshell. It's just a certain methodological or metaphysical attitude to certainty of meaning in various texts, whether philosophical, literary, or cultural. So that's Derrida and deconstruction in a nutshell, and we'll get into more and more how it's relevant to Kubrick, cinema, and other subjects, but that's the baseline. It is just an attitude towards reading and writing based on a certain interpretation of Saussure and then applied to various other philosophies. All right,